Imagine waking up one day to the unsettling realization that you do not truly love anyone. Not your partner, not your family, not even yourself. You've convinced yourself otherwise for years, lived a life full of gestures, promises, and expectations. But deep down, there is no authenticity. You've merely been navigating a maze of illusions, performing a dance choreographed by society, your desires, and your insecurities. Yet the haunting question remains: what is love really? This is not a rhetorical question, nor is it an abstract pondering meant for a quiet evening of philosophical reflection. It is a confrontation, a piercing inquiry that demands an answer from the core of your being. The very essence of your relationships, your pursuit of fulfillment, even your deepest connections. All of it teeters on this question. The more you search for an answer, the more you begin to wonder, have we misunderstood love entirely? But there's a darker side to this realization, something far more sinister than simply acknowledging the limits of love. You see, beneath our deepest emotions, beneath the veneer of affection, there lies another force. It is a force that makes love not only dangerous, but profoundly transformative. This force is power. What if love, as we know it, is not the romanticized ideal we've been taught to aspire to, but a complex struggle, a battlefield on which power plays the most subtle, most manipulative of roles? What if love, the emotion we think of as pure, is forever entangled with a hunger for control, for domination, for victory? What if the truth of human affection is a collision of needs, where suffering is not an unfortunate byproduct, but the very price we pay for the experience? In the light of this, Nietzsche's reflections on love, power, and suffering begin to take on a more terrifying clarity. He speaks of a will to power that drives all human relationships, not just those of political rulers or conquerors, but the intimate, everyday dynamics that play out in the most personal spaces of our lives. Is it possible that our desire for connection, our yearning for closeness, is secretly bound by the very forces we claim to escape? Forces that twist our affections into something less noble, more animalistic? The very nature of love, when viewed through Nietzsche's eyes, is no longer a tender emotion, a perfect meeting of souls. It becomes a battlefield, a struggle for mastery, where suffering is not something to be avoided, but embraced as the catalyst for growth. Power becomes the hidden current, subtly pulling the strings of our most intimate bonds. You may think you love, but is it not possible that you are simply exerting your will over another person, bending them to your desires, shaping their existence according to your need for validation, control, or belonging? It is this paradox that Nietzsche forces us to confront. To love, is it necessary to inflict suffering upon the other? And if love requires suffering, does it not beg the question, what kind of love are we actually seeking? As the quiet hum of your daily life continues, this question gnaws at the edges of your awareness. You may go about your day, engaging in acts of affection, sharing moments of tenderness, but something in you knows the truth that Nietzsche dares to expose. Love is never pure. It is never just about connection or companionship. It is, at its heart, about power and the terrible price of suffering that we are willing to pay to hold on to it. But perhaps, deep down, you already sense this. You can feel the tension building, the unease that accompanies the acknowledgement of this truth. It is as though something inside you has cracked open, and now you are staring at a reality far darker than you ever imagined. What if the very essence of your existence, the way you relate to others, the way you experience joy and pain, is determined not by love's light, but by power's shadow? If this is true, then what does that say about us as human beings? What does it mean for our most intimate relationships? And what happens when we realize that love, in all its beautiful and tragic forms, is something more dangerous than we've been led to believe? as you sit with this question, the next one emerges. Can you truly love without wielding power? Is it possible to experience love in a way that is free from the subtle tyranny of control and suffering? Or must we, as Nietzsche suggests, embrace suffering as a necessary crucible through which love can be born anew? These are not questions that can be easily answered, but they are questions that demand to be faced. And it is through this confrontation with love, power, and suffering that we begin our journey, a journey that will take us deep into the heart of human existence itself. The idea that love might be a battlefield where power and suffering reign supreme is an unsettling one. But before we dismiss it as a philosophical provocation or the ramblings of a madman, we must first recognize that this idea is rooted not just in Nietzsche's writings, but in the very structure of human psychology and the way we experience the world. To understand why Nietzsche's assertion hits so deeply, we need to explore the very forces that shape the way we relate to each other. These forces are not just ideological. They are embedded in our deepest instincts, our most ancient drives. They stem from the very core of our being, entwined with both the animal and the divine in us. But it's also here that we must confront a paradox, one that stretches beyond the realm of traditional romantic love or human relationships. It is the paradox of how deeply embedded power dynamics are in our most intimate exchanges, even when we believe we are acting purely out of affection or care. Carl Jung, the founder of analytical psychology, offers a crucial key to unlocking this paradox. In his exploration of the unconscious, Jung suggested that we are driven by archetypal patterns, universal, primal forces that shape our behaviors and perceptions. These archetypes, though they often seem like personal fantasies or desires, are actually deeply rooted in the collective psyche. Love, for example, is not just an isolated experience, but a manifestation of an archetype. The anima, the feminine principle, or the animus, the masculine principle. Jung argued that these forces are not just about romantic union. They reflect a deeper, more primal need for balance within the self. We are seeking not just companionship, but wholeness, an attempt to integrate the fragmented parts of ourselves, to find that perfect balance between power and vulnerability, control and surrender. But this search for wholeness is rarely pure. When we approach love with the expectation that it will somehow heal us, make us complete, we are unknowingly stepping into a dangerous game. Power dynamics begin to emerge not just as a struggle for control over external realities, but as an internal conflict within ourselves. We seek the validation, the recognition, the approval of others, but at the same time, we are trying to reconcile the parts of us that feel fractured and broken. It is here, in the psychological tension between completeness and incompleteness, where the battle for power is most pronounced. Nietzsche, ever the radical philosopher, takes this internal conflict even further. He doesn't merely suggest that power dynamics shape love. He suggests that power is the essence of love. For Nietzsche, the will to power is not just about political dominance or physical strength. It is the most fundamental human drive, the drive to assert oneself, to create meaning, to shape the world around us. Even in love, we are engaging in a dance of power, a way of bending reality to our will, of forging an identity, of seeking the upper hand. The question, for Nietzsche, isn't whether power plays a role in love, but how much of it we are willing to confront. Are we willing to face the uncomfortable truth that our most cherished emotions are built upon a foundation of control, domination, and, yes, suffering? This brings us to the influence of Arthur Schopenhauer, Nietzsche's philosophical predecessor, whose work heavily influenced his thinking. Schopenhauer famously described the world as driven by an irrational will, a blind, relentless force that compels us to strive, to desire, to compete. Schopenhauer's view of love was no different. He saw it not as a selfless spiritual connection, but as an expression of this will, a force that propels us to procreate, to satisfy our basic biological urges, and to perpetuate our species. In this view, love is an illusion, something that appears to be an emotional bond, but is ultimately a tool for survival and reproduction. In many ways, this mirrors Nietzsche's perspective. For both philosophers, love is not a noble, transcendent experience, but a way of asserting one's own will. It is driven not by selflessness, but by a subtle, almost unconscious hunger for power. Whether that power manifests in control over others, the validation of one's existence, or the desire to overcome one's own limitations. The question that both Schopenhauer and Nietzsche present is, are we willing to face this truth, or are we going to continue to deceive ourselves about the nature of our desires? The question of suffering, too, is intrinsically tied to this dynamic. Nietzsche's exploration of suffering is often misunderstood. He did not romanticize pain or seek to glorify misery, but he argued that suffering was essential to the process of becoming. Without suffering, there is no growth, no transformation. But suffering in love is especially crucial. To love another person is to expose oneself to vulnerability, to risk being hurt, to expose one's own weaknesses, fears, and desires. In this vulnerability, power dynamics play out, whether we recognize them or not. Here, the insights of Viktor Frankl, the Austrian psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor, are particularly relevant. Frankl argued that meaning in life is found through suffering, and that we must confront our pain in order to find purpose. For Frankl, suffering is not something to be avoided, but something that reveals the deepest truths about our existence. Love, too, is a form of suffering, not because it is inherently tragic, but because it forces us to confront the core of who we are. We must allow ourselves to suffer through the battle for power that exists even in our most tender moments. At the heart of this struggle is an existential tension that Jean-Paul Sartre would recognize as the fundamental human condition. Sartre's existentialism asserts that we are condemned to be free, free to choose, free to create meaning in a world that offers none. In our relationships, this freedom is both a gift and a curse. It is the freedom to shape our own identities, to assert our own will, but it is also the burden of responsibility. In love, we are not merely accepting the other person, we are shaping them, as they are shaping us. Power dynamics are at play in every moment, even in our most intimate exchanges. And so we arrive at a disturbing truth. The very nature of love, the essence of human connection, is deeply enmeshed with the drive for power. It is a fundamental force that is as old as humanity itself. But it is also a force that we cannot escape, no matter how much we wish to believe in the purity of our affections. And it is this very realization that brings us face to face with the hidden problem. Love, in its truest form, is not something pure and free of conflict. It is a struggle, a dynamic interplay of power, suffering, and transformation. Until we are able to acknowledge this, we are trapped in a cycle of illusions, forever chasing after something we can never fully grasp. But the real question remains, if love is bound by power, suffering, and struggle, is it still worth pursuing? You've confronted the uncomfortable truth. Love is not the selfless, pure emotion it is often portrayed as. It is a battleground, a struggle for power, control, and, ultimately, transformation. But what does this mean for the world you live in? What happens when we fully embrace this understanding of love as power? The answer is both simple and terrifying. Everything changes. The most insidious aspect of this truth is that we are largely unaware of how deeply it shapes our lives. We move through the world, performing the rituals of love and affection, convinced that we are acting from a place of honesty, sincerity, or care. Yet, beneath the surface, something far darker is at play. Our most intimate relationships are not immune to the invisible forces of power. Our desires, our expectations, and even our vulnerabilities are governed by these subtle dynamics, shaping us in ways we barely perceive. Think of the countless ways power dynamics shape human interaction. How we choose our partners, how we conduct ourselves in relationships, how we express affection. On the surface, these may seem like personal decisions, choices we make in the privacy of our hearts. Yet, the deeper you look, the more you realize that these decisions are, in large part, influenced by unconscious forces of control. From the way we dress to the way we speak, from the subtle negotiations of space in a conversation to the very way we touch or look at another person, power is at play in ways that we often fail to recognize. This is where the true hidden consequences of Nietzsche's view on love come into play. The dynamics of power are not just philosophical abstractions. They are deeply rooted in the very fabric of how we relate to one another. The consequences of these dynamics are far-reaching, especially when they are not acknowledged, when we live in denial of the underlying forces shaping our lives. Take, for instance, the phenomenon of romantic dependency. In a relationship, how often do we find ourselves drawn to another person not out of a pure desire for connection, but out of a need for validation, recognition, or control? We become attached to the idea of someone who can complete us, fulfill our needs, affirm our identity. In this way, we are not engaging in a relationship of mutual growth, but rather a relationship of dependency. Here, the power dynamics are clear. One person may feel the need to dominate, to possess, to win the other person's affections, while the other may passively submit, losing themselves in the process. This is not just a personal issue. It is a cultural one. The idea of true love has been commodified and packaged in the language of fairy tales, movies, and songs. We are sold the notion that love should be easy, effortless, and filled with happiness. The consequences of this messaging are devastating. When we live in a world that elevates the image of idealized love, we find ourselves constantly measuring our experiences against impossible standards. In this way, love becomes something we seek to possess, something that should make us feel complete. But, as we've seen, this is a dangerous illusion. Love is not meant to complete us. It is meant to transform us, to push us beyond our limits, to expose us to power struggles and suffering that ultimately shape who we are. Culturally, we are conditioned to believe that love is synonymous with happiness, stability, and mutual understanding. We are told that love should feel natural, easy, and fulfilling. But this is not the truth. Love, as Nietzsche suggests, is often a power struggle, a constant tug-of-war in which both partners exert control, manipulate, and assert their wills, even when they are unaware of doing so. These power dynamics are embedded in every interaction, from the quiet tension of a shared glance to the fierce arguments that erupt over trivial matters. The emotional roller coaster of love, the highs of passion, the lows of jealousy and insecurity, is not the exception, but the rule. And it is here, in this emotional turbulence, that the real transformation takes place. But it doesn't stop with personal relationships. The very structure of society reflects these power dynamics in its most insidious forms. Our workplaces, social circles, even political systems are all built on hierarchies, systems that reinforce the idea of power, control, and dominance. In these spaces, we constantly measure ourselves against others, competing for status, recognition, and influence. The same drive for control that defines our personal relationships is mirrored in our social structures. Whether it is the subtle manipulation of colleagues in a professional setting, the subtle power plays in friendships, or the political machinations of nations, the dynamics of power are ever present. In fact, much of what we consider normal in our daily lives, the way we interact with others, the way we present ourselves, the way we pursue success, is heavily influenced by these invisible power struggles. In the neurological realm, the consequences of these power dynamics are equally profound. Cognitive science has shown that the brain responds to power in ways that we might not expect. Our sense of control, whether we are exerting it over others or feeling it within ourselves, activates the brain's reward centers. Power, it turns out, is addictive. The more control we feel, the more we crave it. This explains much of human behavior, from the way we fight for dominance in relationships to the way we engage in social competition. At a neurological level, power dynamics are not just psychological, they are biologically hardwired into the way we think and act. Even in our most intimate moments, we are often seeking validation, affirmation, or control. And it is in the power struggles of love that we are forced to confront our deepest vulnerabilities, fears, and desires. But the consequences of failing to recognize this dynamic go beyond the personal. They shape entire societies, creating cultures of competition, control, and suffering. As long as we remain blind to the underlying power struggles in our relationships, we perpetuate a cycle of unconscious manipulation. We continue to buy into the myth that love is about selflessness, that happiness can be found in the pursuit of perfect harmony. And as long as we do, we will continue to perpetuate the same destructive cycles of dependency, control, and suffering. This realization that love, power, and suffering are inextricably linked challenges us to rethink the very foundation of our social reality. We can no longer afford to live in denial of these dynamics. If we are to break free from the unconscious cycles that define our relationships, we must first acknowledge the power struggles that are at play. Only then can we begin to rewrite the rules of love, transforming it from a game of power into something more authentic, more conscious, and ultimately more transformative. The question now is this: if we know that these power struggles are woven into the very fabric of our existence, how can we begin to free ourselves from their grip? How can we break free from the unseen consequences that shape our lives and relationships? The answer is complex, but it starts with one fundamental realization. Only by facing the truth of these dynamics can we begin to change them. Only by confronting the darker sides of our desires and relationships can we start to create the conditions for true freedom. Are you ready to take that first step? You now stand at a precipice. The truth has been laid bare before you. Love is not the romantic, pure force we've been taught to cherish. It is entangled with power, domination, and inevitably suffering. You've glimpsed the consequences of living in denial of this truth, the silent, insidious way in which power dynamics shape every aspect of your existence. But the question remains: how do you break free? The first step is not to run from the discomfort, not to shy away from the unsettling truths you've uncovered. To break free from the grip of power in love, you must first make peace with the fact that this struggle is not an anomaly. It is part of the human condition. The rebellion doesn't start with rejecting love itself, but with reimagining it, transforming the way you engage with power in all its forms. The path to freedom begins with radical self-awareness. Nietzsche famously called for the revaluation of all values, a call to examine the assumptions we make about love, relationships, and personal worth. This revaluation is not just about rejecting societal ideals, but about confronting the hidden assumptions that guide your thoughts and actions. What do you truly seek when you love someone? Is it a connection that is free from the need to dominate or be dominated? Can you experience love without manipulating or controlling? The first act of rebellion is to remove the veil of illusion. When you understand that love at its core is a complex interplay of power and vulnerability, you begin to see the subtle ways in which power manifests. It's in the small gestures, the unconscious ways you seek validation from others, the way you mold relationships to fit your needs, even if that means bending the other person to your will. Nietzsche's radical insight is that in order to break free, you must be willing to question the very nature of love, its foundations, its purpose, and your role in it. This is where a profound shift happens. Most people seek love with the expectation of being completed, fulfilled, or saved. But what if you could let go of that? What if you could step into love with the intention of creating, not completing? What if love was not about fulfilling your needs or expectations, but about exploring the tension between freedom and intimacy, between power and vulnerability? This shift is the beginning of your liberation. Consider the examples of those who have successfully rebelled against conventional expectations of love and power. Figures who transcended the traditional paradigms and created new paths. Think of Simone de Beauvoir, who, through her existentialist philosophy, dared to reframe love as an experience of mutual liberation rather than dependency. She advocated for a form of love where each person is free, where the bond does not become a prison of obligation or control. The rebellion lies not in rejecting love, but in redefining it, acknowledging that love can exist as a creative force, not just a consuming one. Historical examples abound of individuals who've resisted the power dynamics of love and formed relationships based on mutual growth and freedom. Take Friedrich Nietzsche himself, for instance. Though his personal life was marked by failed relationships and intense isolation, his writings contain a fierce call to embrace the suffering that comes with authentic self-expression. Nietzsche's relationships were fraught with power struggles. But in his philosophy, there is an invitation to transcend these struggles through radical self-awareness, personal strength, and the willingness to face suffering head-on. For Nietzsche, the true rebellion lies in affirming life with all its complexities and contradictions, rather than fleeing from them. Another historical figure who embodies the concept of rebellion in love is the philosopher and poet Rainer Maria Rilke. In his letters, particularly in Letters to a Young Poet, Rilke emphasizes the importance of solitude and individuality within the framework of love. He writes that one must not lose themselves in the other person, but instead cultivate a deep connection with one's own soul. Rilke calls for an intense, almost ascetic relationship with love, one that requires personal development and a fierce commitment to self-realization. His advice to the young poet when it comes to love is not to give up one's power, but to channel that power into one's own growth. These examples demonstrate that breaking free from the traditional constraints of love requires an unflinching commitment to individual authenticity. It means letting go of the notion that love should complete you or fulfill some deep, unmet need. It means embracing love as a transformative force that challenges you to be your best self, not a tool for acquiring control, validation, or security. This rebellion also requires breaking free from the suffocating grip of societal conditioning. The cultural narratives around love, those built on fairy tales, idealized fantasies, and media portrayals, serve as the chains that bind us. In a society that values the romanticized ideal of love as the ultimate source of happiness, it is difficult to imagine a love that is grounded in independence, power, and mutual growth. But this rebellion begins with rejecting the collective myths about love and creating your own narrative. Instead of succumbing to the idea that love must always lead to eternal happiness or union, you must embrace the idea that love is, at its best, a mutual journey, one that is filled with uncertainty, suffering, and, ultimately, self-discovery. This journey requires you to step into the unknown, to relinquish the need for certainty, and to be willing to experience the pain and the freedom that comes from standing outside of societal expectations. Love, then, becomes a vehicle for becoming, not for possession or completion. It becomes the crucible in which your identity is forged. The rebellion is also, paradoxically, an act of surrender. Not surrender to another person's will, but surrender to the truth of your own vulnerability. It is through acknowledging your fragility, your imperfections, and your wounds that you can begin to form deeper, more authentic connections. True power in love lies not in the assertion of dominance, but in the ability to let go of control, to embrace love without the expectation of winning or conquering. This path of rebellion does not offer an easy escape from the complexity of love. The struggle for power, the tension between control and surrender, will never entirely disappear. But it is through embracing the full spectrum of human emotion, through acknowledging that love is both beautiful and painful, liberating and suffocating, that we can begin to break free. It is through the full embrace of life's contradictions, of power and suffering, that love can become a force of genuine transformation. The rebellion, then, is not a rejection of love, but a transformation of it, a commitment to engage with it honestly, authentically, and with a new understanding of the forces that drive it. Only by confronting power head-on and acknowledging the role of suffering in love can we hope to break free from the invisible chains that bind us. The question now is, are you ready to take the leap into a new kind of love? A love where power no longer rules, but where transformation and freedom reign. If so, the next step lies in confronting the ultimate truth, the final realization that will reshape everything you thought you knew about love, power, and suffering. But that truth, as with all profound realizations, requires courage. Are you ready to face it? You've journeyed through the dark labyrinth of love's true nature, power's subtle grip, and the suffering that inevitably accompanies it. You've confronted the uncomfortable reality that love is not the pure, selfless force we are told it should be, but a battleground of control, desire, and vulnerability. You've explored the hidden consequences of these dynamics, how they shape not just your personal relationships, but the very fabric of society itself. You've rebelled, or at least begun to, by rejecting the illusions and myths that bind you to a narrow, shallow understanding of love. And yet, as you stand here at the precipice of this deep reflection, you are confronted with one final, staggering truth, a truth that will, if you allow it, completely transform the way you live, love, and suffer. It's a truth Nietzsche understood, one that sits at the very heart of his philosophy and resonates through the core of the human experience. Love, power, and suffering are not things we overcome or escape from. Rather, they are the very forces that create us. In this realization, you will see not an answer, but a new way of seeing, a perspective so radical, it will forever shift your understanding of yourself and the world around you. The ultimate truth is this: the struggle for power, the inevitable suffering that comes with it, and the very dynamics of love that have seemed so entangled in control are not to be avoided, but embraced. These forces are not our enemies. They are the foundation of our becoming. In embracing them, we do not succumb to defeat. We transcend them. We create something new, something that is uniquely ours. This, in Nietzsche's terms, is the concept of the Übermensch, the Overman or Superman. But it is not a superhuman in the traditional sense. It is not an external force we aspire to, but an inner transformation. It is the ability to affirm life, to embrace the suffering, power, and love that come with it, not as obstacles to our happiness, but as the very conditions through which we shape our existence. The Übermensch is the individual who has come to terms with the inherent chaos of the world, and in doing so, has redefined what it means to be human. To affirm life in this way is not to seek to escape suffering, nor to eradicate power struggles. It is to embrace them as vital, transformative elements of existence. Love, in this context, becomes not a passive state of being, but an active force that we shape, mold, and challenge. It is not the tranquil state of union we have been taught to expect, but a dynamic interplay of forces, of creation, destruction, and recreation, that drives us towards self-actualization. The suffering we experience in love is no longer a burden, but a crucible in which we are refined. In embracing this truth, we no longer need to seek control or validation from others. We no longer need to cling to the illusions of a perfect, pain-free love. Instead, we recognize that love is always a negotiation, an exchange, a mutual shaping of each other. It is the tension between two beings, not their harmony. It is the willingness to engage with power, to see the manipulation and control for what it is, and yet not be consumed by it. The beauty of love, then, is not found in its purity, but in its potential for transformation. Every struggle, every moment of suffering, becomes a stepping stone toward greater self-awareness and greater freedom. This is the ultimate paradox of Nietzsche's philosophy, that in accepting power, in facing suffering head-on, we find our true freedom. We do not become slaves to power. We master it, not through domination, but through understanding. We do not escape suffering. We transcend it by seeing it as the necessary fire in which we are forged. And in love, we do not seek to possess or control, but to create, to shape ourselves and the other into something greater than we could ever be alone. The truth, then, is not about rejecting love, power, or suffering. It is about redefining them. The power dynamics you once feared, the suffering you once avoided, the love you once sought for validation, they are the very ingredients that allow you to create the life you desire. And paradoxically, it is through the full acceptance of these forces that you find true freedom. True love is not the absence of power struggles, but the full engagement with them. And so, as you stand here at the end of this journey, the question is no longer how to escape the forces of love, power, and suffering. The question is, how will you engage with them? Will you continue to deny their existence, to live in the illusion of a perfect, easy love? Or will you step into the arena, knowing that each battle, each moment of tension and vulnerability is an opportunity to transform yourself, to become something greater than you were before? In the end, it is not love that will save you, nor power, nor the absence of suffering. It is the willingness to engage with them fully, to embrace them as the forces that shape who you are meant to become. The ultimate truth is that you are not a passive participant in life's struggle. You are its creator. The power, the love, and the suffering are not things you escape. They are the very tools with which you craft your existence. So what will you choose? Will you continue to live in the shadow of illusions, or will you step into the light of your own becoming, where love, power, and suffering are no longer your chains, but the very means of your transformation? The choice is yours.